All right. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this live with No CD. My name is Kristina Orlova, and I am known also sometimes as the OCD Whisperer. I do have to say I enjoy that name. I think it's a fun name that actually was given to me. With this family that I worked with, and the mom of the kiddo essentially said, "My God, like you know how to answer all the stuff and do all the stuff with my kid. It's like you're like the OCD whisperer." And I thought, "Oh my gosh!" So that's kind of how I got that name and started a podcast like that. Hi, Adam, welcome. So today on this Instagram live, as an expert, basically I'm here to answer questions you guys might have and to share a little bit about what it's like also to live with OCD and treat OCD. So I myself have OCD and, I've had it for well, my whole life, honestly, but I didn't really quite realize it was OCD until kind of like early to mid 30s. So it was a while before I got diagnosed. So yeah, so it's definitely interesting to have that kind of experience of learning that you have it like way later in life. But what I want to do is really make sure that I answer your questions. So I'm going to start diving right in. So I'm going to go just whoever starts, kind of asks first and do the best I can to answer them. So here is a question. Do you have any advice on how to get through the toughest, most anxiety-inducing exposures? Wow, that is a great question. Okay, so a couple of things. One is when you're working on really difficult exposures that are really anxiety producing. There are a couple of things that I typically do with folks is we might either look at if it's too difficult, we want to then maybe break it down and see what we can start with to kind of build it up. So we might maybe do something like an imaginal or narrative exposure to kind of almost like warm up the brain, and then we go do a live exposure. Or we might practice putting together a narrative and a live exposure together. We also sometimes might have folks start with something that's maybe a little bit different, like a different exposure altogether, just to remind the brain and the whole body, the physiology and everything of what to expect and what it's going to feel like and what will happen, so that then when you do go ahead and start to work on more anxiety-inducing exposure, you're basically bringing that memory with you. So you're going to remember like, oh yeah, this is what the point of this whole thing is. So sometimes starting with an exposure that's maybe not related to the most intense anxiety inducing one can help, but also sometimes doing something like a narrative that can be more like a warm up can help with that. The other piece too is, remember when you're going in to do an exposure practice, right? The point of exposure is really exposure to response prevention, of course, is to be deliberate about it, right? We're not just jumping in for shock value here, right? This is not like a surprise. It's really meant to be on purpose, deliberate, where you are planning it out. You're looking to learn something, right? You're looking to learn about your own anxiety. You're looking to learn about your own body and how it responds. And you're looking to learn about your own thoughts, what happens. So I would definitely say that you want to make sure that as you're doing, especially hopefully planned exposures, you kind of think through, okay, what is my fear? What am I going to expose myself to? How am I going to design this exposure practice? What behavior do I want to practice instead? How long will I stay in this experience? And then you go. So you really want to kind of pre-plan and be clear about what it is that you're going to be doing, and then you go for it. And then when you're done, you come back and you say, okay, what did I just learn from this experience? The last thing I'll say about it is you want to make sure you go ahead and repeat something that's difficult many, many times. So it's not enough to do something once. We have to come back and do it again multiple times so that you are getting yourself to really re-experience it, refamiliarize with yourself with it, habituate to it, and really continue to learn. Extrapolate the learning. That's the most important part. Pull out the learning. What are you noticing? What are you seeing? What are the patterns? What are ways maybe you're surprised? Like, wow, I actually got through that. Or wow, okay, I'm still here. So that would be ways to start. Okay, so next I have, hi, this is from Brittany. So 2 questions. Recovered from COVID 2 months ago. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, COVID is eek. But all of a sudden I'm getting breathing anxiety. I'm fixated on it and feel like I'm going to have a panic attack when I think about it. So I Maybe I'm missing the question here. So what's the question? Oh, I think there's a second part here. Okay, sorry guys. So getting a panic attack and I can't stop thinking about it. I have somatic OCD and other themes. Any advice for post-COVID? So basically, this is a great example of when you have something like a real life event takes place, right? And then when you have OCD, your mind can get really sticky. And so even if you've experienced something that was difficult and challenging, our OCD brains love to kind of get stuck on something. So in this case, it sounds like when you're going through the fact that you had COVID and now you're hyper focusing on the breathing, you're still going to employ ERP strategies. And I'm hoping that you know what ERP is, exposure and response prevention. So you want to be incorporating ERP. You want to incorporate a lot of mindfulness training. I don't know if you guys know, but research shows that when you practice meditation and mindfulness for just 2 weeks consistently every day, if that's 14 days, very literally your brain starts to change. The amygdala center of your brain actually decreases, and that's the part responsible for the flight and fight or freeze response, the alarm system. Your prefrontal cortex gets thicker. You're able to actually just observe what's happening in your body. You're able to observe a little bit more what's happening in your mind without getting completely kind of sucked right into it. You're able to actually have a little space and just kind of see it almost like a little bit of a distance. So I highly recommend you implement mindfulness and meditation training, and not just when you're anxious, right? You want to actually do this like you brush your teeth. You want to just start to do it every day. Get yourself into that habit so it becomes part of your lifestyle. So that would be one thing to do. The other thing is that if you can't stop thinking about it, there's the wonderful exposures. You can do imaginal exposures and really identify what's that fear thought that I'm getting stuck on, and what is that ultimate fear? What's that ultimate thing I'm so scared of happening? And do an imaginal script around it and work that script. And if you have to write different scripts that have different variations to address the different variations of the fears, do that. So you want to make sure you're really allowing yourself to really sit and embrace and entertain the fear thoughts, because you have to remember how OCD works, right? OCD brain, things get stuck because our brains, and I say ours because I also have OCD, we can get stuck on stuff that most people kind of don't. They're able to kind of see things clearly for what they are and move on. But for an OCD person, one of the parts of the brain that's impacted is the prefrontal cortex, which is here, right? So our ability to make decisions, to learn things, sometimes kind of, we're not able to do that well. So in the situation when you have a real life event take place and then your brain gets stuck, you want to help your brain learn how to move on, essentially. And how we do that is by actually using exposure response prevention tools. So I definitely highly recommend that you make sure that you do some exposure practices. Let's see, what do we have next? Give me 1 second. All right, so now No City has given me so much confidence to face my fears. Awesome! That's great. Love to hear it. Thank you so much for sharing that. Yes, No CD is actually a really great app. They have so many cool free groups, and they have great, like, you can design your own ERP in the app that you can also use for free. And then when you need to have a specialist, you can contact them and you can have a specialist. So it's really, really cool. Next, we have a question of how to handle the obsession of getting or possibly having a psychotic disorder. Oh my gosh. Well, I hope I'm saying your name right. Jenny. So first of all, this is a great question, and this comes up really often. Do you know how many people with OCD say that? If I could tell you, like, if I had a penny every time I heard this fear thought, my jar would be full. I myself also had this fear thought at some point in my life, thinking that I'm losing my mind and I'm going to go crazy. So you're going to probably hear me repeat the same thing 100 times, which is exposure response prevention. If you haven't done this work yet, if you don't know what exposure response prevention is, it's definitely going to be really important that you'd spend some time to learn what it is, that you actually learn how to expose yourself to fear thoughts, because fear thoughts are different than when we have external stimuli, external triggers, right? So external triggers might be people, places, objects, situations. So when we're having external triggers, it can be, we want to find ways of how to interact with those external triggers. So when we do exposures for those are called in vivo, live, okay, or situational. When we're dealing with thoughts, anything that's in our head that pops in, like whether it's images or fear thoughts or some sort of like a feeling that something feels off, but it's really intrusive and it keeps popping in. For those things, we do imaginal exposures, and for intrusive feeling states, we do what's called interoceptive exposures. And then, of course, every exposure, you have to make sure you're doing response prevention, because the whole point here is that you want to retrain your brain to recognize that when I'm in front of this trigger, this fear thought, or this situation or person or place or thing, when I'm actually facing it, when I'm in front of it, and when I sit with it long enough, I get to actually learn what truly happens, which is, does this fear actually come to be? Right? For a while, you don't know. And so you might need to entertain that not knowing. And that's what OCD lives off of. OCD loves to have you chase certainty. It loves to have you chase to get this clarity of, this absolute yes or absolute no. I forget where I heard this, but I kind of loved it. It was saying that, OCD is kind of this all or nothing, like I'm all good like Gandhi, or all bad like Hitler, right? And in OCD, you're kind of always in this between battle. And it's learning how to walk that middle road of saying, I don't know. I'm going to have to embrace not knowing that, who knows, maybe one day I'll be psychotic. I don't know. And until that moment happens, I got stuff I got to do. So that's really the stance you want to take. You want to make sure that you don't suddenly put your life on a timeout because you're feeling anxious or because you're having really uncomfortable thoughts. You want to say, okay, I'm having all that, but I'm still going to choose to live. I'm still going to do things that matter to me. Those are the things that are most important, right? Because if we put our life on hold, life goes by really fast, just like that. So how you handle those? ERP, imaginal exposures. Those are going to be your number one go-to, and make sure you design response prevention planning. All right. Adam or Adam, so I hope I'm saying it right. Please forgive me, anybody, if I'm not saying your name correctly. I apologize ahead of time. How do I self-ERP with partner-focused ROCD that makes me want to hate my girlfriend and etc.? Yeah, I have relationship OCD, so this is definitely like, there's so many elements to this question. So one thing is, you want to first identify what are all the different triggers. So basically, you want to create a roadmap, right? So to work on anything, you first have to have a roadmap. So you have to get clear on what are all the different things that trigger me and my partner-focused OCD. So is my partner like cool enough, or is it something focused about how my partner looks, or is my partner smart enough, or are my partner's ethics okay, or will we be accepted, or what? So you want to get really clear, what are your triggers? What are those internal triggers? What are the things that pop in your head? Externally, you want to get clear, what are those triggers? Do you get more triggered in certain situations around certain people with your partner? Is it more when it's just you and your partner alone? Is it when you are talking about certain topics? So you want to really have a robust understanding of what are the different things that trigger your anxiety, trigger your OCD. Once you have that roadmap, if you will, then you have to say, okay, now let me design some exposure practices. So exposure practices are going to include, in this case, definitely a lot of imaginal exposures, because what we have to learn to do is learn how to entertain fear thoughts, because our brain is producing them anyway. So everything I'm talking about here, it's not like we're talking about you pulling something out of thin air, right? We're not talking about you grabbing something that, somebody somewhere that's just like really drastic and scary. We're talking about thoughts you already have, right? These are fear thoughts you already have. So it's about saying, okay, if I'm already having them anyway, let me then learn how to work with them in a more productive, better manner. And the way to do that is by saying, okay, let's see if we can have me actually entertain the fear thought, have the thought on purpose. Let's see what happens. So self-ERP would be doing imaginal exposures. Then After that, it might be saying something like, okay, what would be my response prevention plan for that? So is it that I tend to hyper focus on my partner and on my partner's flaws? Is it that I go in my mind and I start to mentally do a lot of checking, or a lot of comparing compulsions, or I do a lot of mental analysis, or I'm reviewing past situations and kind of replaying some scenes in my mind? What am I doing compulsively, whether it's mentally or physically? Am I maybe avoiding some situations now, or avoiding being close to my partner? So you want to really understand the landscape of your OCD. Once you get that, then you start to work on it step at a time and progressively design practices which will have you have the fear thoughts on purpose, start to move towards situations you're avoiding, interact with topics if you kind of don't want to talk about certain things because those things are triggering for you. Start to find ways to make contact with those things. So the first thing is you have to create what I call an anxiety structure analysis. It's also known as a hierarchy. So you've got to have that in place. If you don't know what an imaginal is, it's really about writing. It's called a narrative or a script, means the same thing. It's essentially writing out your worst feared outcomes. So instead of looping in your head and analyzing it ad nauseum, because you're trying to constantly figure out if this fear thought is true or not, or if this doubt or uncertainty is true or not, or will it happen or won't it happen, or how bad will it be? So instead of trying to figure it out, you want to say, hey, what if I actually just have that fear thought all the way through on purpose? Write out my consequence, write out my core fear, and write it out in such a way as if it's actually happening. Usually those are written in first person, present tense, like it's happening now, and your worst feared outcome, and you paid that price. You want to read that narrative a lot. I sometimes tell folks to read some, if they're nervous, I'll tell them read something maybe 10 times just to get familiar with it. And then, I'll tell people, sit with it maybe and read it over and over for 10 minutes, then sometimes 20, 30 minutes. We might even get into saying, let's have you read it multiple times throughout the day. I might have people even record it on the phone and then listen to it in the morning or at lunch break or in the evening, or even maybe identify a hot thought and have that fear thought on purpose while in the presence of your partner. Maybe when you're watching a movie or having a bite or something that you're doing, some simple activity, while you allow yourself to have that thought and engaging in the activity completely like you would as if the thought wasn't there. So it feels really counterintuitive. It really feels a little strange sometimes. But that's the point. The point of this work is to do it in such a way where you're really showing yourself that I can have this thought and I can be here and I'm willing to embrace not knowing, because temporarily your brain is basically hijacked. Temporarily, you don't know. You really can't tell. Is it this bad or is it not, right? Our ability to detect error, that like this part, again, the prefrontal cortex, it's on hyperdrive. So you can't tell the difference temporarily. Everything kind of pauses. So for that time, while you're in that experience, you have to learn how to really lean into that experience. The more, as we all know here with OCD, the more we fight those experiences, the more we try to get away or fix them, we get more stuck, right? None of us, I've not heard one person with OCD say, oh yeah, no, Kristina, for me, when I do that, I actually figure it out and I get clarity. No, everybody says, maybe for a minute I think I get clarity, but then I end up having more questions, more confusion, and I spin out and my anxiety goes through the roof. So you want to make sure that you really are, again, getting a really clear roadmap and then design your practices. So you're really being deliberate and planful and purposeful. All right. Hi, Jasmine. Jane, I have that one. Just say I may or may not, I can handle it. Yeah, that's it. Exactly. I may or may not handle it as a great way to respond to OCD. Totally love it. What do I do in those situations of losing hope due to anxiety and OCD? Yeah, Rodolfo, I hear you. This is a really, I think everybody can relate to this, right? And I don't know if what you're saying here is that in the situations of losing hope due to anxiety and OCD, it can kind of be a mixed bag, right? Because sometimes we lose hope because things just feel so overwhelming that it can be difficult to figure out kind of where do I start even, right? How do I start to chip away at this and break the cycle down? It might be difficult because maybe something actually happened. Maybe there was a real life event and your OCD spiraled out of control and it actually impacted your friendships or relationships. that happens, right? There's times where our OCD can be so kind of out there that it strains relationships, it strains things with family members and loved ones. And so if anything like that is going on, one thing is, remember, OCD is treatable, but it does require work. And oftentimes we get nervous, right? Like any human, it's normal. We get nervous, we get scared to really sometimes go for it, right? And the best thing I could tell you is, if you have a therapist, really put both feet in and give this a fair chance and go all the way in. If you don't have a therapist, please get a therapist. NoCD provides great treatment. I also have Mastering OCD Foundations program. It's a monthly membership. I also provide teletherapy, and I also do coaching for folks who are out of state, where we work very specifically on things. There's podcasts. I have one. I know NoCD has one. There's online classes like Kimberly Quinlan and Nathan Peterson. So there's lots of resources out there. So I want to make sure a couple of things is: one, plug into a resource, and two, plug it into a community. Oftentimes when we're dealing with this stuff, it can feel really lonely and it can feel really hard, and you can start to feel like you're losing hope. But when you plug it into community, like iocdf.org has great resources. You can look at local groups. We have Chrissy Hodges. She runs peer support groups. Those are great to plug in there to be amongst your own peers. You can jump on NoCD. Also, I know started to run groups from free. They actually have a relationship OCD group for the person that asked the question earlier. You can look at joining that group, but I would say plug into a community, plug into more people around you that you can talk to, that you could see who are dealing with OCD and who are dealing with moments where it's hard and moments where they have victories, and then you slip and then you have victory. It's kind of a process. It's not all black and white. So I'd really encourage you to do those things so that you really realize you're not alone. And sometimes we all have hard moments. I know we all have hard moments. I've certainly had them. Being a specialist and having OCD doesn't mean I still don't get, tripped up, or I still don't get triggered. I still have OCD. I still have anxiety. I still have triggers. But sometimes, more than not, I'm able to manage them pretty well. And every so often I don't. And then I have to kind of, be gentle with myself and kind of tell myself, it's okay. Like, let's see, what can you learn from this and how can you make it better for next time? And I think that's another element is have some self-compassion, right? Have some kindness with yourself, right? So I hope that that's helpful. Next, we have Anna. How do I deal with my childhood sexual mistakes? Really, when OCD, please help. I'm scared. Yeah, that's a pretty heavy duty question. In terms of, there's a lot of pieces in there. And so kind of the best I can do in this format is kind of give like a broad brush stroke. So anytime that we have real life things that have taken place, whether it's sexual mistakes or arguments or things we've done in the past, and I think a lot of us, if you think about as humans, part of growing up and part of being alive is kind of figuring this life out, right? So I think what we're really talking about is realizing, like, look, part of what we're talking about is past things, honestly, are in the past, right? We have to kind of recognize, I kind of can't do much about it. It's already gone, right? What we can do now today is recognize, how is it that my OCD brain is getting stuck, right, and sticky, and where is it that I'm compulsing? So oftentimes with something like this, I see a couple of things. One is there can be a lot of negative self-talk where there's a lot of self-shame and blame. Two, there can be a lot of compulsive rumination. Compulsive rumination can be things like, you think you're thinking about something because you're figuring it out and you're getting closer to having an answer, but then turns out that you're not getting an answer. You're just going in what I call a hamster wheel. You're just spinning out. So you want to get clear on, what is it that I'm doing compulsively around this? What urge am I having to keep coming back and reviewing and reviewing and reviewing, right? The situation. Where is it that maybe there's some guilt or shame or embarrassment or an anxiety, of course? Like what are those things like? Where do they live? And then really it's about working through very kind of methodically. I would say in this case, definitely, I would want, I would definitely highly suggest connecting with a provider, with a therapist, because you want to kind of help somebody work with you to show you together how to work through these kind of moments where you'll need to entertain this piece of kind of dealing with that uncertainty of not knowing, like what the impact of that past mistake might be in the future, because that's usually what OCD does, right? It takes something from before and it keeps playing this out like, well, who knows, maybe this is going to actually affect me down the line. Maybe it'll affect my job, maybe it'll affect my future relationships. So it's being able to recognize, I don't know, like I'm gonna have to sit with kind of not knowing what some of those outcomes might be, right? And how do I sit with that? Like that's always the big $1 million question, right? How do I entertain uncertainty? How do I embrace it? How do I accept this? Well, it comes with practice, right? It comes with practice, and it comes with putting and using several different tools and strategies. What we do know at this point with evidence-based practices, specifically for OCD, is we definitely know exposure response prevention works, and we would still be doing ERP even in this case. We definitely know mindfulness is really important to really learn how to engage that observer sense of self, and not that sense of self that just immediately jumps into stuff and starts to judge, because we all have this inner critic that can be so judgmental sometimes, right? So we have to practice being able to disconnect from those processes and just observe our experience and stop fighting it, because the experience is the experience. And then there's, of course, other tools that we do in terms of practicing acceptance. And some of these things really come from acceptance commitment therapy, as well as exposure response prevention and mindfulness training. So it's really kind of putting all those pieces together. And then lastly, of course, some emotion regulation skills. So those are the things that I would want to make sure that you're able to actually do. But again, a lot of it, I think, would have to be done with somebody, so that you can kind of have times where you can process some things as you need to, but also address things really strategically. Looks like there's a clarification, Brittany. My question was confusing. Sorry. Any advice on our ERP for post-COVID anxiety fixated on breath? Got it. You want a specific, like, okay, what could be an idea? So if you're fixating on your breathing, it sounds like there might be some hyper awareness OCD going on. So one piece is going to be a lot of response prevention. So a lot of looking and understanding, how am I mentally ruminating on this? How am I mentally dwelling on this topic? How am I mentally hyper focusing my internal consciousness on my breath? Am I checking it? Am I like when I breathe, am I listening for it? Am I trying to figure out, am I breathing right or am I not breathing right? That's the kind of stuff you want to look for. So exposures would be imaginal exposures, addressing the fear that if the fear, again, depending what the fear is, right? That I'm not breathing right, or my breathing is off. And then is the fear that it's going to be stuck like this and be off like this forever or indefinitely, or maybe something is off and ultimately I'm going to end up, I'm going to die, or I'm going to ultimately develop some sort of a lung condition, or right. So depending what that fear is, you want to address that in your imaginal exposure. Then for response prevention, you want to start really paying attention to when you are starting to hyperfocus or check or listen to or for breathing. You want to do a couple of things. One is practice interrupting that and catching yourself and really literally redirecting. So for response prevention behaviors, we do want a healthy redirection. We do want you to actually notice that, oh, if I'm going in right here and I'm checking, I'm breathing, I want to say, oh, wait a second, I'm doing that thing again. We're not doing that. And literally catch yourself in the act and then do something completely different, which would be then focusing on something else, returning to the activity you're doing. So every time you feel compelled to go inwards again and check the breathing, you want to tell yourself, nope, we're not checking. And then you redirect back to the activity you're doing. And you're going to have to retrain, recondition yourself with that. The other element is you can also breathe in different ways, again, depending on the fear thought. I've had some people where we might have them breathe really fast, like hyperventilate, like, like that. We might have people breathe like through a straw. So they might feel like they're kind of, that little like suffocating, choking a little bit, like, right? So you want to practice different ways of breathing that will generate those fear thoughts and anxiety. And then that's where you can combine it with things like imaginals. And of course, again, being really clear what compulsive behavior you're engaging in. Are you compulsively avoiding? Are you mentally ruminating? What are you checking? What are you doing? And then make sure you have a clear plan of what you want to do instead. So anytime there's hyper-awareness, you want to remind yourself, hey, I don't need to be paying attention or hyper-aware of this, and I actually need to pay attention to what I'm doing here now. And bring your conscious awareness to focus back on the task or whatever the activity is. I also recommend sometimes for people, honestly, change the environment. If you notice that you are starting to compulsively check, while you're in one room, maybe get up and go to a different room. So that might be something else you do. So it just, again, depends on how exactly this manifests for you, but I hope that gives you some ideas. Thanks for the question. Hi, Jacob. So can ERP help people who do not have obvious compulsions anymore? Well, I mean, I guess I'm not totally clear what that means. So obvious compulsions anymore. Usually, I mean, OCD exists because there's some sort of a compulsion going on. So if somebody's not really experiencing much, like if things are not super intense and you're kind of going through your day and you're able to kind of get stuff done and you're functioning more or less okay, then you're kind of doing all right. And that's part of the experience too, and that's okay. If you want to, I mean, I always recommend for folks, it's always a good idea to learn ERP because it's kind of, think of it this way. It's like being preventative, right? Oftentimes as humans, the funny thing we do is we sometimes will wait until something gets really bad. And then we're like, oh my God, right? Panic. Ah! And so I think it's really important to think of ERP as like, okay, if I'm not maybe having intense symptoms right now, but I can still learn the strategies and the tools and still practice them and incorporate them in my life so that I'm being preventative, so that I don't have to get to that place where it gets so bad that now I'm panicking, right? So you want to make sure that if things are not super obvious or super intense, it's still great to learn. I still suggest it. I still always recommend for folks to practice and implement mindfulness and meditation. If you don't even know what some compulsions might be engaging in, I definitely think it's important to learn about that, right? Because a lot of people that I work with really often say things like, well, I don't wash, or I don't line things up, or I don't really check. And they think that's it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So let's talk about all the other ways people might be engaging in behaviors that maybe you're not aware of. And so we're going to start to go to this exhaustive list of different behaviors. And then folks go, oh my goodness, I didn't realize I do all that stuff too. And I'm like, there we go. Right. And now we're starting to increase our awareness and learn what a compulsion actually is, what an urge actually feels like. Like, for example, I didn't know for the longest time in my life that I was a pure person. Like that's what it's called. I mean, again, the name, it just is not really accurate, but I had a ton of mental compulsions, ton. And I had guilt through the roof and anxiety through the roof. And I didn't know this whole time that what I was really doing is called compulsive rumination, right? So you want to make sure that you learn what are all the different compulsions and kind of what are the different things that people do. And then make sure that you do actually learn ERP tools. I think they're wonderful tools, and I can't say enough how important it is to learn and have as many different tools in your toolbox. All right. Next, we have Catherine. How to overcome the thought of going crazy. So this is kind of like a question that I had earlier, right? About like, what if I have obsessions about being psychotic? Same concept. We want to use imaginal exposures in this case. Narratives. Anytime you have fear thoughts, anything that's in your head that just keeps popping in because it's already there, right? We're working with what's already there. You want to do a lot of imaginal scripting, a lot of narrative work. It's really, really helpful. So that's what I would do if I was you. And then the other thing we could do also is, some other ideas is I have people read articles. I'll have them watch movies about people going crazy. So we'll start to get creative and start to think about all other different ways where and how this topic comes up and how it can be triggering, and make sure that we help people connect with that topic and really kind of immerse themselves in that topic, so that OCD brain starts to relearn that I'm not going to avoid this, right? You're trying to freak me out, but I'm not going to avoid it. I'm actually going to stay with this. I'm going to really practice this. I'm going to recognize that I'm having these intrusive thoughts. I don't know the answer to this question, right? I don't know if maybe I'm going to go crazy or not. Maybe today is the day, maybe not, but I'm going to allow myself to live my life regardless. So those are some of the examples. Next, how do I self-therapy with partner-focused OCD that makes me want to hate my girlfriend and my thoughts feel so real and convincing? So I think I already answered this question earlier. Everything, the part I think, or newer part here is everything feels so real and convincing. Again, the number one thing is you have to learn what OCD is and how it actually works. The best thing anybody with OCD can do for themselves is psychoeducation. Psychoeducation may sound really simple to some of you guys, but I tell you, it's a powerful strategy, because when you don't really fully grasp what's happening to you, it's really easy to get lost in that experience, right? But when you start to understand what's going on and how all these pieces work together in the brain, and where and why it feels real and so convincing, then you start to go, oh, okay, got it. Now you start to work towards it. And like I said before to Adam, is that you start to work with creating your anxiety structure analysis and then designing the ERP practices. Hi, MA. Can ERP help BDD? Absolutely. So we definitely have different kinds of exposures that we do with BDD folks. I've definitely had folks with BDD and OCD. So we definitely want to do different exposure practices. With BDD, there's other training we do. We do attention focus training or a mirror training as well. And then we definitely look at exposures and response prevention. So different ways of how like a BDD folks can sometimes maybe like try to maybe do more grooming, or they maybe try to cover themselves up in ways, or maybe they avoid a lot of situations. There's definitely a lot of kind of surface checking. And so we want to, again, just like with everything else, understand the layout, kind of the landscape of how the triggers are showing up for each person. And then we design and address things through exposure response prevention. You know, the thing with exposure response prevention is this. It may sound scary, but here's the thing that people, I think, keep misunderstanding. ERP it's not like it's shock treatment, right? It's literally a deliberate process. It's really a step-by-step process. It's like peeling an onion. It's layered. So the whole process is really for you to learn. It's really based on you learning what does my anxiety look like? What does it sound like? What does it feel like? What kind of thoughts do I have? How can I recognize when I'm having this urge to want to compulse, or when I'm having these really sticky thoughts? Or in the case of BDD, folks can have a lot of really negative, self-critical, heavy thoughts. And so how to understand those and how to work around those and with those to retrain yourself. So, you know, when we can understand how these pieces work together, it becomes a lot easier to be able to then address them with the right tools, so you can actually come out of this on the other side. And I've definitely worked with folks who just have BDD and OCD, and we definitely have successful treatment with that. Hi, Carolina. Do we OCD people have more intrusive thoughts than the rest of the population, or do they also have them but react differently? Great question. This is definitely a common question that I get. So basically, everybody gets intrusive random thoughts. Absolutely normal. It's actually literally normal. With people with OCD, because of the way the circuitry in the brain is kind of working or not working, the communication is not the same. So think of it this way. If folks without OCD brain, when they have something random that pops in, they're able to usually kind of decipher and realize like, yeah, okay, that was kind of weird thought, or that was garbage. Or the level of threat is kind of low, like that's not likely to happen. They toss it, they move on with life, they forget about it. People with OCD, because of the way the circuitry works, it's kind of like, it's like it doesn't quite close, like the communication circle doesn't quite close, right? So you're left with this state where instead of things filtering out to spam, right? Imagine if your spam folder didn't work Oh my God, that would be crazy, right? Like we'd have insane and stupid emails in our email box. So if your spam folder doesn't work, then you have all this stuff coming into your inbox, and now you're having to sit there, look at all this stuff, and it becomes difficult to sort out. Like, is this stuff threatening? Is it not? Like, what do I do with this? What do I not do? Does this mean I'm a bad person, or am I okay? Or okay, is it, like, what? How likely is this thing that this thing will happen? Well, what if this fear does happen? Well, but what if it could happen? Right? We start to get stuck, and we start to question it incessantly, and we are trying to figure it out and make it go away, essentially. And what we're not realizing is that the way our brains are made is that essentially our spam filter is just not working well. And so everything feels very real because it activates our fight and flight response. So the limbic part of the brain goes on and it starts to signal the alarm system. And now you're like, oh my gosh, what do I do? So for folks with OCD and for other folks that don't have OCD brain, yes, we all have intrusive thoughts, but folks with OCD, these intrusions are much more stickier. And because of how the brain is kind of processing things, it's that it essentially isn't going into the right place. So we're not able to decipher correctly what really is the level of threat and danger here. So we really have to lean into and learn how to entertain not knowing for a period of time, because literally when OCD brain is active, your system is literally getting hijacked. So in that moment in time, you just don't know. And that's when we really want to use the right strategies, which are going to be exposure response preventions. Those tools literally help you come out of those experiences and start to look at everything again. And now you start to learn. Now you start to really see what's going on and how this whole mechanism works. And you start to really understand yourself on a much deeper level. It's actually really profound. But yeah, thanks for that question. Great questions, guys. Like lots of great questions. So I'm going to be on here probably another like about 5 to 10 minutes. Then I'm going to have to head out for today. So let's see if I can get through some more questions. Marcus, did you know what your obsessions and compulsions were when you started therapy? If not, how did you learn exactly what they were so you could do your best in therapy? I mean, I personally will be honest with you. I didn't know. I had no idea what my obsessions and compulsions were. It took me a long while because I did not know there's something called relationship OCD. So my combination is that plus just right perfectionism. Those are kind of my two big ones. I've had other things that my brain jumped between as well, but those two have really been kind of a consistent. When I was younger, like remembering back, I was like, oh yeah, I definitely had contamination show up and I had some magical thinking stuff going on. There's some harm and sexual. But some of the stuff I just didn't know. And things, I did some weird behaviors. I would do this weird, like tapping on the side of my leg, or I'd like feel like I had to stretch my eyes a certain way before I could kind of relax, like all this weird stuff that my parents thought, oh, okay, well, that's peculiar, but she'll grow out of it. Some things I kind of grew out of, but some things I noticed, oh no, I still, every so often, like little tapping suddenly shows up and I'm like, whoa, what are we doing? So it took a while before I really realized what it is, because I had to learn and study like, oh, there's all these subtypes, there's all these themes. So it's like a whole new world opened up. And then once I started to learn that, then I kind of dove in all the way. I really stepped in because I really wanted to understand what is going on with me and why I was feeling this stuff. And that's where that psychoeducation came into play. And then just like what I'm saying here, learning how to, and the importance of stress reduction strategies, meditation practices, exercise, and ERP, literally like just like 2 weeks ago, I had a moment where things got really sticky, and I literally, like, I have Post-its with me because I literally grabbed a Post-it and I wrote down my imaginal script, and I had to sit there and my anxiety is like, but I had to keep going with the day. And I was like, okay. And I started reading it, and then I put the Post-it right on my computer so that throughout the day, as I'm working. And then when I would have breaks, I'd sit and I'd read my imaginal for, 10, 15 minutes. And then I'd go do some more work, sit down, read it again. And I kept staying with that imaginal exposure, for example. And it took a couple of days, this recent kind of little sticky moment. It took a couple of days. It lingered a little bit, and that can happen. But that's that's kind of the piece of it. So you dive in, you start to learn, you start to study, you kind of observe yourself. And then, when you work with a therapist, you do things like a Yale-Brown obsessive compulsive scale. So you do an assessment, you get kind of like I work, and I have thorough checklists that I give people, thorough obsessive checklists and compulsive checklists. And so we really have that conversation, and we go through all the different subtypes and ways that things can show up. And then that's how you start to learn more about it. Thanks for that question. Okay. And do you believe the meds help at a point one day you don't have any more OCD? So that's a good question. I have to always give a disclaimer. So I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm not an MD. So I can't really 100% tell you something like, so please take this with a grain of salt. The thing is that in all my work with all the people that I've worked with over the last 4+ years with just OCD, I'd say like 98% of all my work is literally all just OCD. I see such a range of combinations. Some people don't do medication and don't want medication, which is fine. Some people want medication. Some people feel like they want to have that intervention short term and they get off medication. So really, and some people decide that they only want to do the medication route. So the reality is it's a very personal preference. So it really depends on kind of where you're at. The one thing I will say, and every psychiatrist I've ever consulted with says the same thing, which is medication really, we want to look at it as if things are really intense, that medication is looked as a way to help to cool things down enough so that you can actually do exposure response prevention. Because when you're doing behavioral therapy, you're actually actively retraining your brain muscle and you're learning. Medication, if you think of it this way, this is something a psychiatrist once said to me, it's kind of like it softens the edges. There are some people, of course, with some combinations of things they take where things can kind of be cooled down, and some people where it's not. So it's literally, it's such a spectrum of experiences. So it really would depend on your personal preference. But I would say every person that I know that's a psychiatrist who understands and knows OCD will tell you that, they really don't want to look at meds as the one and only solution. They really want people to learn ERP because that's where you learn the right tools and strategies so that you can really apply them for the rest of your life at any given situation that comes up. Hi, Rebecca. When beginning treatment, how do you explain what OCD is like to loved ones without it? Great question. Yeah, that's usually tough, honestly. Sometimes it's really tough to explain this experience, right? Because people often come back with things like, oh yeah, I have OCD, or oh, we all have OCD. And believe me, when I've had friends say the same thing, I often have to tell them like, no, we actually don't all have a little OCD. And no, not everybody. And just because you like to keep things clean, like that doesn't mean you have OCD. Like, let's talk about what it is. Like OCD is not a pleasure principle. It's not something you get excited about and you're like, yay. We all know that. But, so couple of ways to do it. One is sometimes using podcasts. Like, for example, I've told folks to check out my first episode where I talk about what is OCD and I break it down. So you can use a podcast where you have loved ones listen. If you're working with a therapist, you definitely make sure to tell the therapist like, hey, let me bring in my family member so we can kind of address this. And the therapist can help walk you through. International OCD Foundation is a great resource, and you can find information there about how to talk to family about it. And there's also, they have a free handout, I forget, but it's a nice lengthy kind of well-written handout about what OCD is. So it helps to break down that from the educational component. So those would be places to start. What are the differences between OCD rumination and schizotypal personality disorder ruminations? Oh, we're now getting into a whole different area here. I don't specialize in personality disorders, but I will tell you this. What rumination in general is, okay, because people who have generalized anxiety can ruminate. People who have depression can ruminate. People with OCD can ruminate. People without any diagnosis can ruminate. Rumination basically means when we are dwelling on a topic, essentially, okay? In general, that's actually a normative human behavior. In general, do we ruminate on things? Yeah, we do. But the reality is, for OCD people, you don't just ruminate a little bit and move on, like most compulsions. you end up feeling like you have to go back, and you have this kind of internal sense of urgency and need, like I have to go think about this again, or I have to go figure this out, or I have to try to get to the bottom of this, or I have to get that answer. And so it's driven by a completely different process. So it's not just as simple as I'm checking something out because I'm just kind of thinking through it a little bit. It's really about this compelling need to go in our minds and try to problem solve and figure things out and try to get to the bottom of something. And that's really the biggest piece in OCD, where how rumination becomes this compulsion, because it's not just something you do a little bit and you can walk away from it and move on. That's the biggest thing with all compulsions in OCD, is people with OCD do not move on. They get stuck. Okay. So I'm going to take, I know there's several more questions here, so I'm going to take one or two more, and then we're going to have to end. And I love all your questions, guys. You've got great questions. These are so great. Yasmin, what would you say are some of the keys to success in ERP? Well, I would say one is being deliberate about it. Plan it, okay? When you're just starting and when you're just learning, sometimes people make a mistake of they just kind of dive right in. And that can sometimes actually be, it could feel like a little too much, right? If you jump just right in, you might not even be sure, what are you really doing exactly? How are you supposed to do this? So I would say the best thing is make sure you actually prepare your exercise. It's an exercise, right? Think of if you're going to work out, right? You don't just go and start lifting 50 pounds. Like, oof, that's going to be, like, I don't know about that, right? You want to prepare. So you warm up your body, right? You get ready. And then you start with maybe, 5 pounds, then 10 pounds, 15, 20, right? You work your way up. Same thing here. So you want to think of ERP as like, okay, it's an exercise. So how do we get ready to engage in exercises? Well, we have to prepare. Well, how do you prepare? Well, you have to first get your education, get clear. What is OCD? What is ERP? How does it work? And then I sit down and I design my exercise, because it's really meant to be planned and deliberate, so that you are really doing what we call behavioral experiments in cognitive behavioral therapy, so that you are kind of predicting, what do you think is going to happen? How will I face this fear? What are the behaviors that I want to challenge? And then I go and I practice. And then once I've practiced, I come back and say, okay, well, what did I just learn? What did I just experience? What happened? So those are ways that I would suggest to kind of to do those things in order to be successful. Thanks so much for the spam folder explanation. You're welcome, Catalina. Great. Glad that it was helpful. I think there's last question I'm going to take here. And it is Catherine. I find that the more I live with ROCD, the more it becomes my reality. I find myself wanting to talk to my significant other less, not finding him attractive, feeling less loving. I'm afraid I'll break up. Does OCD affect your feelings, or is it something else? OCD absolutely affects your feelings. Relationship OCD, again, it's something I also struggle with. It's a doozy when you're in it, because it gets really difficult to separate things out. This is such a big topic that we can literally spend like half a day training just on this. So part of what I'm hearing there, the more I live with this, the more it becomes my reality. Right there, just in that first sentence, what I'm really hearing is, how are you in your mind perceiving your relationship and significant other? Would be my question to you. Those are the things you want to ask yourself. How am I perceiving things? What meaning am I assigning to things? How am I compulsively ruminating? And then other behaviors that I'm engaging in, like avoidances and so on. Because a lot of the times when we're doing a lot of mental rituals and we're not even realizing we're doing mental rituals, we literally can start to convince ourselves of something. And when we do that, we absolutely can start to have really negative feeling states. And that is also, to be honest, is one of those sneaky little compulsions that folks don't often know about, and that they're engaging in. Folks with OCD can definitely, do some obvious things, but also things that are like this, that are these really nuanced little pieces. So I would definitely say that, again, it does affect feelings. it's definitely, the more you do this process, and if you're compulsively ruminating in any shape or form or fashion, which I'm gonna guess you probably are, it's definitely going to impact how you're going to find your partner, like attractive or not, or feelings, and then also if you're checking your feeling states all the time, like, do I have enough love? Am I attracted enough? So if there's a lot of checking behaviors as well, those kind of things really will impact your experience. So you want to make sure you get the right help. And NoCD is a great app for that, and they have great therapists. And lastly, for myself, I have a Mastering OCD monthly membership. I have my podcast, OCD Whisperer podcast, and I cover all sorts of different topics, including relationship OCD. I also, in the membership, I actually have Chris Tronson, who comes in and does monthly topic trainings and their monthly workshops. We have also a live Q&A call once a month. And then I have, like I said, my private practice in California, and then behavioral coaching. So if anybody's interested to connect or talk more, please definitely feel free to reach out. And thank you to NoCD for having me. This has been awesome. And I hope you guys have a great evening or the rest of your evening and great weekend. Okay, bye.